Hey everyone, welcome back to Love Wins. Have you ever had a fundamental change in your thinking, like something drastic where you went from looking at something one way to seeing it the opposite way? It doesn't happen a lot. I wish it happened more. Think of it this way. A play happens in hockey, football, contact sport, and a player ends up down, injured, and the play gets replayed. It might be on the highlight reel over and over and over, different angles. People are discussing it at work. They're discussing it at home. They're discussing it with their friends. And you could have 3 people watch that play from all those angles in slow motion, regular speed, and they could all have 3 different opinions of it, very drastically different opinions. One might think it was a perfectly fine, clean hit. One might think it was a terrible hit. The person should be suspended for many games. And yet the hit itself is the hit. It didn't change. It's our perspective that varies. And our perspective is formed by many things that we may understand or not understand. So we might look at other people and judge them and fear them based on their gender, based on their color, based on their height, based on all kinds of things because of past experiences, past trauma, whatever. So it's very complex when we talk about things being true or not true. And what I want to talk about in this video is why should anyone read the Bible? Since we're going to read it and see it from different perspectives, and maybe never agree, what's the point? Well, before we get to that, let me tell you about a video that I've shown several times, a couple times to my own church. I just went and spoke in a different place last weekend and showed it there. And the video is on a YouTube channel called Getting Smarter Every Day or Smarter Every Day. Some fascinating videos there. And one of them is a video about a backwards bicycle. Backwards in the sense that the guy who makes the videos is an engineer, and there was a welder at his work who designed a bicycle that steers backwards. So when you turn to the right, the wheel goes left. When you turn to the left, the wheel goes right. So when he showed this bicycle to the engineer who's making the video, he thought right away, I can do this. But he couldn't. He understood that the bicycle was backwards. He understood the concept, but he couldn't execute. And he said it really made him frustrated. So he determined that he was going to learn how to ride this bicycle. It took him 8 months practicing every day, at least 5 minutes every day for 8 months. Why? Because he had trained his body how to ride a regular bicycle. And whether you realize it or not, when you ride a bicycle, your brain is constantly making calculations to shift your weight, to react, to keep you balanced. And when you get on a backwards bicycle, your brain is still making all those calculations, but it's making it for a bicycle that steers properly. So your body's literally shifting the wrong way for what it needs to do. And that's just one of the factors. So there's all these unseen, unthought about things that are happening all the time in our minds and in our body that we've made automatic by practice, by experiences. So if you think about walking upstairs at night in the dark and you think there's another step at the top, but there isn't, so you put your foot down expecting it to land 7 inches higher than it does, and you fall forward. You might not fall right over, but your weight definitely shifts forward and downward because your brain had already calculated for the step and it wasn't there. Which means our brain is calculating for all kinds of things all the time. So if we've had trauma, we very quickly sense danger, because our body is preparing to defend itself again, even when it doesn't need to, because it doesn't know if that imminent threat is a threat or not a threat. It just interprets it as threat because it's been threatened so many times before. Practice. And this is happening to all of us all the time. And one of the reasons why we don't understand each other is because the experiences that brought us to where we are right now vary greatly. And we all assume everyone else thinks and calculates and has the same experiences and background that we do, which is wildly not true. And since we've never lived theirs and they've never lived ours, it's a struggle to understand. In my travel home, I get on the train to go to the airport in Toronto, and a young woman sat down beside me, and she said hello, and I could tell right away by her accent. I said, "Oh, you're from Ukraine." And her eyes dropped, and her face dropped, and she said, "No." And then I knew, "Oh, you're from Russia." And her eyes stayed down, and her face stayed down. "Yes." And I said, "That's okay. I'm sure whatever is happening isn't your fault." And she said, "Thank you for saying that." And her eyes got bright again, and we had a conversation. Now, why did her eyes drop and her face drop? Because of where she's from. Because I'm sure she's uneasy to begin with about what's happening between her country and Ukraine. And I'm sure she's probably had experiences where people thought less of her or didn't want to speak to her because of where she's from. You see, where we're from, what color we are, many factors impact how people relate to us. But those factors don't make us who we are. I can't tell if a person's kind or unkind by their skin color. I can't tell if they're going to be helpful or not helpful by the country they're from. And yet we make these judgments based on stereotypes, based on past experience, based on all kinds of things. So what does this have to do with reading the Bible? What does a backwards bicycle have to do with reading the Bible? When you read the Bible, you are reading it through the lens of who you are. So you're not really reading the Bible. You're reading your worldview into the Bible. Let me illustrate. When Jesus was here, he had 12 disciples that he spent all kinds of time with and did amazing things with and through and for. You would think after a while they would have believed everything he said and trusted him implicitly. And they believed that they did, until he did or said things that conflicted with their worldview. So when they were born and raised, they were told by their parents and their community and their church and everybody that there was a Messiah coming soon, and he was going to be a conquering hero and a new king in the order of David, and he was going to get rid of the Romans, and Israel was going to be great again. It was going to be awesome. And they believed when they found Jesus that he was going to be that person. But they added on to him all of these expectations that they had, that they were raised with. So when he told them he was going to die, they didn't believe him. Not just did they not believe him, but they opposed what he said strongly. And that's a weak word. You see, Jesus dying was not an option. Didn't fit the scenario. How could he be and do what he was supposed to do if he was dead? So even though they thought they believed him, and even though they thought they trusted him, as soon as he dared to step out of their expectations and their worldview, they turned against what he said. So even when people are strong friends and they love each other and they trust each other, when their worldviews come in conflict, be it over a war, be it over an election, be it over a vaccine, whatever the case may be, we can easily turn on each other. Again, what does this have to do with reading the Bible? And if we're reading our own worldview into the Bible and we're not really seeing it for what it says, what's the point? Well, here's the point. Jesus began almost every story or teaching he gave with the words, "The kingdom of heaven is like." And he did that on purpose because the people were expecting a kingdom, but they weren't expecting his kingdom. So he was trying little by little and piece by piece to prepare them for the fact that the kingdom he was coming to create wasn't the kingdom they were expecting. It was completely different. But he knew if he told them that outright, they would either reject him, walk away, wouldn't be able to handle it. Whatever the case may be, it would erect a wall that he would not be able to climb over to reach them again. So very slowly and very carefully, even with his 12 disciples, he tried piece by piece and little by little to shift their thinking. He had to. There was no other way to do it. 8 months, 5 minutes or more a day, just to learn how to ride a bicycle the opposite way. How long will it take for us to be exposed to what is true before we can see it, accept it, embrace it, believe it, and shift our worldview to fit God's worldview? Some people think God is a tyrant. Some people think God is unfair. Some people think God is a pushover. Some people think God doesn't care what we do or how we act. He'll love us anyway. And those are all conflicting views. They can't all be true because there's only one God. And the person that he is and the way he relates to us and the character that he has and the kingdom he's building, there's only one truth about all that stuff. It's us that's the variable. And the only way we're ever going to see him for who he is, to even be able to make the decision, do I want this God? Do I want this kingdom? Is this something that I'm really in favor of? Before we can even get to the place where we can make that decision, we have to be able to clearly see who he is, what he's like, what he's offering, etc., etc. And the only way to do that is to practice trying to hear him through the word that he's given us day after day until we get to the place where when he says things that we want to recoil against, we're like, oh no, let me give him a chance to state his case. In John chapter 8, it's a pivotal chapter in the Gospel of John. And it's between Jesus and people who believed in him. It wasn't Jews who were against him, who were trying to trick him. They believed in him. But by the end of the conversation, they picked up stones to stone him. Again, because his identity and their worldview were opposite, and they could not handle what he said. And the very next chapter begins with the story of a man born blind. And it wasn't until this past week that a friend of mine showed me that that's not an accident. I've read the Gospel of John. I've written through the Gospel of John. I love the Gospel of John. And yet I'd never seen it. That Jesus went from a conversation with people who were blind to who he really is to telling a story that involved an encounter with a real man who was born blind. And the point is obvious now to me. We're all born blind. We're God blind. We're God's kingdom blind. We're God's perspective blind. We are God's worldview blind. We're born that way. And worse than being born blind, we're born thinking that we see. We're born thinking that we know something about God and something about his kingdom and something about his worldview. And thinking we see is worse than knowing we're blind. The only cure is to go back to the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, start there. And just keep reading them and asking God to help you see him for who he really is. Because, man, if there's one thing this world desperately needs, it's to see our God for who he really is, because the truth is beautiful and it's great news. We'll see you next time.